Do you guys really ever sit back and think about how our lives, like how society is set up to make it really difficult for us to build and maintain strong relationships with people, whether it's romantic relationships, whether it's friendships, whether it's, relationships with our family? There are a lot of things that are set up for us to fail in this way. And there were three ways specifically that I've been thinking about lately that I wanted to talk about. So we'll start with the ways that I think are most often talked about, the frustrations that many of us have with, society and how our communities are built and whatnot. And I think the last one is one that we really don't think about quite as much. So the first one is the most obvious, which is social media. I think, the internet has opened up the world in so many really cool, really beautiful ways. And at the same time, the use like frequent internet use can also make us feel really lonely. And I think about, me personally, these days I'm not on social media, not really. Obviously I'm here on YouTube, and I also dibble and dabble on Reddit and on LinkedIn. If you looked at my at this channel at all, I'm on LinkedIn as well. But the social media platforms I think most people would consider social media platforms in terms of, you know, um, frequently seeing people that you actually care about, that you know personally, or like having a lot of the back and forth discussion, like Instagram, Facebook, um, Twitter slash X, those sorts of things. I'm really not on, but I do think it's really cool how, like now, for instance, using YouTube will recommend me a video from somebody in a country that I have never been to, that I will probably never cross paths with ever in my life. Like a video that was posted 2 days ago of some guy in Mexico or India or Italy or wherever talking about their job and their life and something that they're frustrated about or their family or whatever. And that's a conversation that I would never be able to have with this person if not for the internet. Um, or when I was on Instagram, thinking about how many people I met and the immediate thought before, you depart from each other is, oh, what's your Instagram so we can keep in touch? And there are people who I maybe have only met once who I have on Instagram, and it's still cool seeing their lives develop as they post, their own travels and events with their families. And oh, I got married, and oh, I'm having a baby, and oh, like, oh, we bought a house. Like, those are connections that would be extremely difficult to foster if not for the invention of social media, right? But in the same token, and TikTok too. I don't know how I forgot TikTok, but whatever. At the same token, there are so many studies being done on the negative effects of getting so much input from external sources, right? Like, and this is a little different than, the social aspect, but there have been studies done on like frequent social media use and how it affects, young men and young women differently. In that for young women, it generally affects our self-image. So how beautiful we view ourselves, how intelligent we view ourselves, body image, it being connected to like eating disorders and body dysmorphia and things like that. Whereas with young men, it tends to almost affect like, how do I put this? It's almost like a failure to launch situation. So, you, as a result of frequent social media use, you see more young men who are maybe more reserved, more to themselves, less likely to be able to sustain a job or move out and things like that. And obviously, all of these issues can cover both sexes, but it is interesting how much that's increased with the invention of social media. And also, just personally thinking about my experience, it's absolutely insane how when I was on Instagram and on TikTok and you're scrolling, you're watching videos, you're seeing photos, you're seeing posts, you can you can interact with hundreds, if not thousands of people every single day and not really have any actual connections with them. Like you can be taking in all this information, all of these opinions, all of these um, you know, facts and whatnot from people that, like I mentioned before, you would never necessarily have interactions with, uh, whose thoughts and opinions have nothing to do with your life and your job and how you feel about yourself and your family and all these things. But yet and still you're making connect you're interacting with these people, and there's no real substance to it, even if the person is sharing something that's valuable, something that's informative. In terms of the actual human relationship, it's still very surface level. And that's actually one of the reasons that I really appreciate like comment sections, specifically like here on YouTube. I appreciate when people comment because, especially being a smaller channel, even if I don't get to them right away, I still have the ability at this point in my YouTube career to go through my comments and reply to people and see what people are saying and like have a meaningful back and forth. I don't know how people with 100,000, 200,000, a million followers ever have the opportunity to do that. I mean, I know some people will go on to other social media platforms, like there are YouTubers who will go back and forth with people on Instagram and Twitter because it's a little more, excuse me, it's a little more manageable. But anyhow, back to the point. I really do appreciate how you can have a little bit more of a meaningful back and forth with a small, platform versus a huge one. But yeah, it's like I think it's a combination of almost conditioning ourselves to have very surface level connections with people. If the majority of your human interaction is 10 to 60 seconds and you don't have the ability to ask a question and get an answer, or connect on any meaningful level, then it kind of stands to reason that that would probably spill over into your everyday life where you're used to having the hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm good. How are you? Oh, I'm good. Conversations, and that's just kind of it. Or any interaction that's more than a couple of minutes, you start to get a little impatient. You start to get a little stir crazy, a little antsy. Like I got to pick up my phone and go to the next conversation. I have to get the next idea, pushed into my brain. I don't know. I think it's fascinating, and we already do have quite a lot of data on social media and its effects on people, but I don't necessarily think that we have a ton of data yet on the effects of social media on society as a whole. And that's the information I'm really, really interested in getting in like the next 10, 15, maybe even 5 years, to be honest. But I think social media is new enough. We probably need another 10 years to get like the full weight and breadth of what social media has done to us as a people. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and obviously it's not everywhere, but I find that being in a, I guess, country, it's not specifically a US thing. It is maybe more of a cultural thing. Um, and I know it happens in other countries as well, but obviously my experiences here in the US is being in a society that's a bit more individualistic, you know? I've talked before about how, for example, with more and more of us getting into therapy, and I'm not ragging on therapy, I'm in therapy myself. I talked to my therapist today. Uh, but being in therapy, I think sometimes it can be difficult to maintain balance in terms of, you know, your therapist is focused on you. You're the person that's paying them. You're the person that whose opinions and perspectives they're getting, right? So there's only so much information that they're getting from you as a person. And a lot of therapeutic advice, I find, especially what you see on social media, is like, okay, how is this relationship serving you? If this relationship is not serving you, get rid of it. If you don't have the capacity to, be able to help your friend move, if you don't have, if it's inconvenient for you to ask a follow up question rather than, just cut this friend off after they do something that you don't like, um, then, then don't just cut this person off. It's things like that. And also just in general, thinking about how everything is like, do what's best for you. And don't get me wrong, there's a reason why that wisdom is so widely used. It's so widely distributed isn't the right word, but that's the word we're going to use for now because I can't think of the better word. um there's a reason why that's so important, I think, for people to take to heart in some ways, because as the saying goes, like, givers have to have boundaries because takers don't. But it can be difficult for us as a society to maintain a level of, I don't want to say respect for self, but not burn ourselves out thinking about everyone else's opinions and everyone else's needs and whatnot. And also think about how our actions, even if it doesn't seem like it affects other people, how that affects our communities, our families, our friendship groups, our relationships, etc. And that's a really difficult thing to do when everyone is thinking of themselves and not as the collective. I think, for instance, like, something that's very common in other cultures is just, for example, like intergenerational living arrangements. So being in one house and there might be, grandparents, children, and grandchildren all living under the same roof. And there's so many benefits to that because, for example, as the grandparents get older, they have people to watch over them. As the grandkids start to be born, the grandparents can watch them. The parents save money on childcare, they can stay close to their families. Grandkids have stronger connections with their grandparents. There's shared living expenses, there's shared household responsibilities. um just stronger family connections and whatnot. So there's a lot of benefits to things like that. Whereas, like, for instance, here in the States, now granted, it's a little bit different in our current economy because life is expensive and it's not getting any better with, just current events and inflation and all the things. But, it can be, there can be a lot of stigma attached to being as young as 23, 24, 25, and still living at home, let alone being in your late 20s, early 30s. And I even know people who are like approaching 40 still living at home, and there's a lot of it, there's a lot of stigma attached to that. And again, I think there are reasons why things are set up that way, but there's obviously a whole lot of comfort. Me as someone who is living, excuse me, living mostly on my own now, I absolutely understand the comfort of coming home to a quiet house with, not having to worry about if anyone else has eaten, not having to worry about, oh, if I come in too late, is it going to bother the person I'm living with? And if I make a certain decision on decorating my apartment, like how is somebody else going to feel about it? Just simple things. Obviously there is a lot of comfort that comes with living on your own, but there are so many benefits to us, maybe adopting more communal mindsets when it comes to how we live our lives, and not just where we live but even how we make decisions and things like that. And there's so much I feel like we can dig into in terms of in terms of being an individualistic society and things being transactional. Like, what is this relationship doing for me? What can I get out of this relationship? Am I getting anything from this relationship with my mother? And man, this friend, I really feel like, there's no value in this friendship. Like, we have good conversations, but what's the value I'm getting? What's the shareholder value? Think of the shareholders. um, yeah, it's so dumb. But anyway, um, yeah, like the thinking of how transactional many of our relationships have gotten, when if if more of us thought of the collective, then less of us would have to worry about what is this relationship doing for us, or what is this person going to do for me, because the other person would also be thinking about what can I do for this other person. Does that make sense? Like, if, for example, I'm meeting a new friend, if my first thought was, this person is really great, what can I do for them? And the other person also had the same thought, like, wow, what could I do for this person to improve their lives, to make their life a little bit better, to, et cetera, et cetera, then fewer of us would have to be individualistic because all of us were thinking about the community and like the collective and the other person. But it's kind of a slippery slope. Like, once the more and more people who are thinking about themselves, then defensively, excuse me, almost defensively, more and more of us have to think about ourselves because everyone else is out for themselves. Which kind of leads me into the last point, which I don't think we talk about nearly enough. I think people are talking about it more, but not nearly enough. And that's how cars have affected our society. And this is very specifically for like US and maybe Canada too. But any society where like cars have completely dominated like the modes of transport, and there's less walkable places, less micro mobility in terms of using scooters and walking and bikes and etc etc. And I really want you to think about it, right? When you are on, there's so much that we can go into here, but if you're on the freeway and somebody pulls out in front of you, I would say most of the time, I don't think about it as like this person pulled out in front of me. I think about it like this car pulled out in front of me. And the person who is in the other car is also thinking the same. Like, I have to get in here, I have to get in front of this other car. When we stop thinking about the people around us as people and as vehicles, I think that does something so kind of insidious but very interesting psychologically to us, because now our community is not filled with other people with needs and families and errands to run and all the things. Now it's just a motor run by gas. Now it's just an engine. Now it's just a set of four tires and a metal box. And it's interesting as well. I'm actually reading this book called Palaces for the People. And if you don't know, urban design, walkability, and like car centric infrastructure, public transportation has been one of my obsessions for like the last couple of years. And this book is basically explaining, I'm only like a quarter of the way into it, but it's basically explaining how car infrastructure changes our societies so fundamentally that when you compare cities where there's car centric infrastructure versus a less car dependent like town, city, whatever, the survival rates for even like extreme natural disasters are much higher in the places where there are fewer cars, largely because the communities are stronger. It's less about the infrastructure itself and more about how cars affect our communities. So, for example, when you're in a more walkable place and you walk outside to go grab the bus or hop on your bike or whatever, you're more likely to encounter your neighbors. You're more likely to know who the old lady next door is and have her kids' numbers in case of emergencies. You're more likely to check on her when the weather gets extreme and it's extremely hot or it's extremely cold. And you know that most people in the building have been, snowed in, for example. You're more likely to knock on your neighbor's door and ask her if she needs anything, ask her if her backup generator, maybe not generator, but her heater is working, or if she has enough canned goods to make it through the next few days, et cetera, et cetera. And then it also affects how lonely we are as a people because there's this concept called third spaces. So, your first place is your home, your second place is work, and your third place is any place that you go outside of those two places where you might be a regular, where you have community. And the second place can also be like work or school. So a third place, for instance, can be um, your local mall where teenagers used to go and meet their friends and walk around the mall and go shopping and eat in the food court and hang out and that sort of thing. It could be a local coffee shop where you remote work once or twice a week. It could be your favorite bar, it could be a bookstore, it could be the dog park, wherever, right? When you have more car centric infrastructure, one, you are generally spreading out the space between you and your neighbors. So if you think about like a suburban neighborhood, generally it's individual single family homes where you're getting into your car in the garage or in the driveway. Fewer people know their neighbors. You don't know how many kids your neighbors got. You don't know what they do for work. You don't know whether the man across the street's name is John or Mark or Jim Bob. um but because these places are also so spread out, you spend more time commuting and less time in communal spaces getting to know the people in your neighborhood. So it's harder to make friends when you don't have a place that you're going to regularly and seeing the same people over and over and over again, right? Like if we look at I know media isn't necessarily the most accurate depiction of how things were, but if you look at like old TV shows, there would be like an old pub or an old bar that some guy would go to like after work before he hopped on the train in New York, that he would stop at and he would play pool for like an hour or two after work, and those would be his friends. Or you think about like I said, a coffee shop that maybe you remote work from once or twice a week. You see the same barista. They have a trivia night every Thursday, or a Monopoly night every Monday afternoon, or happy hour every Wednesday, and you go and see the same people. You start striking up conversations. You find that, like, oh wow, you work in the same industry as me, and oh wow, you have a kid the same age as mine. And now you call this person and you're like, hey, I heard there was another trivia night at this other bar, this other lounge or whatever, and now you're making friends, right? When we're stuck in our individual boxes for a good chunk of the day, and we're dealing with not only the cost associated with cars, which is a whole other thing. The economics of car ownership is horrible. Um but we're sitting in our own boxes, either listening to our own thoughts or a podcast or music or whatever. Those are potentially hours every single day that you don't have communicating with another person. And then you think about it, like, when I was going into work every day, depending on which job we're talking about, I was commuting between an hour to just over, well, not even over an hour, commuting for an hour to like an hour and a half every single day to get to work. Okay, that's time sitting in traffic. That's time having to be alert and on and making sure that I'm driving defensively. And by the time you get to work, you know who I don't feel like talking to? My coworkers. As nice as they were, I like talking to them people. Um, and of course, like over time, you do get to know people and whatever. But it affects how much you want to interact with other people because you spent time alone, frustrated, stressed out, for some overstimulated. And do you really want to deal with other people? Or by the time you get home, you've spent an 8, 10, 12 hour day at work. You drove an hour there. You've driven, it's usually on the way back, it was worse. So an hour or two back. How much of that time, even if you love your spouse, even if you love your kids, even if you really get along with your parents, that also affects the amount of time that you want to spend with them. That affects the version of you that the people that are closest to you are going to get. And I can go down a whole rabbit hole, just talking about how, like, car infrastructure affects us as a society. And maybe I will if you guys want to hear more about it. Or you know what, if I just feel like talking more about it, we'll see. But yeah, that we'll wrap it up there because I will keep talking for another 30 minutes. But yeah, I think it's so unfortunate how, like, technological advancements obviously have improved our lives in so many ways. Societies ebb and flow and change over the course of history. So, that's bound to happen as well. But it can almost be frustrating how deliberate you have to be to just want to be a person that interacts meaningfully with other people, when, at least for me, I would much prefer if it was something that was baked into our society more. If those systems were maybe a little more accessible. And I know there's going to be somebody thinking, like, you have the ability to do it, which is true. But I do think in societies that function more efficiently, in societies where people are happiest, you look at the happiest countries around the world, a lot of that is baked into society. It's not up to the individual to have to go out of their way to build relationships and put themselves in situations to meet people and that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't know, just something that's been on my mind lately. So yeah, thanks for joining me here on this video. If you don't know, my name is Alexis, and I post on YouTube every single day. I think today is like day 64, so it's been a smooth minute, and we're getting pretty close to that 100-day mark. Like we have zoomed past 50% of the way, halfway to our 100-day first goal. So Feel free to subscribe if this was interesting, if for some reason you enjoy hearing me yap. And yeah, I'll see y'all tomorrow. Bye.